it a person or an animal or?
A good-sized man. Something looks like a man.
Okay. In the neighborhood before?
Yeah, my dog was killed here just recently. I don't know what it was.
Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses.
If I was going to take it. So whatever it was, it was Jesus Christ, you better.
Sure.
See ya.
Hello?
Get somebody out here.
What's on now, sir?
Son of a bitch is about 6'9".
Do you see him now, sir?
Yes, I'm looking right at him.
Uh-oh. Is he in your yard, sir?
Yeah, God, he's big.
Okay, what's he doing in your yard?
He's looking at me.
And the guy is on foot.
I don't know what. It's a big, real big person.
But it is a person.
Yeah, I'd say it was a person, somebody really big.
Good evening, folks. Welcome to Sasquatch Hypotheses. Looks like tonight's guest is not available. Again, that's always wonderful when you're doing a live show. Anyway, I guess tonight I'm going to have to wing it. So give me a second here. I'm going to put up my phone number. Why is it? Oh, I see. Yeah, I'm going to put up my phone number and answer some calls. So if you give me a second here to get the image of my number up here. Got 3 viewers. Y'all can go ahead and, if you have any questions, you can put them up there in the chat. I have the chat here. I can actually read it. I was going to talk. Last show I said something about discussing Dyatlov Pass some more, but I gave it some thought and figured, we kind of really covered that in the last show. So, unless y'all have some questions about it, I'll try to answer them as best as I can. I've only seen, 2 or 3 of the videos and interviews on that stuff, so I'm not an expert on it, but I'll try to answer your questions. Okay, there's my phone number. You can call me at this number if you have something, if you've had an encounter yourself and want to discuss it, or have some questions or whatever. There was a topic I thought about discussing, maybe in the next show or separate video altogether. And that was couple of different kind of related things. It has to do with the way that researchers, first of all, researching, what are we researching to begin with? We've got all of the footcasts that we really could want. We know we have the recordings of vocalizations. We've supposedly gathered hair and blood samples, which just come up as unknown primate. So there's really nothing more to research in the field as far as I can tell. I mean, if y'all feel different, if you think that there's something we could be researching out there that's, something that still will be helpful, that some unanswered questions that can only be answered by field research, then go ahead and put it in the live chat. and let me know. But as far as I can tell, there's really nothing. I mean, I don't understand why field researchers go out in the field anyway. They run around in the woods and do what? Unless you're actually going to capture one of these creatures and bring them in for study, there's nothing more to be gained by doing field research. If you can go out there and capture some, high quality HD video, that's one thing. But I don't think anyone's actually doing that. I mean, they never could figure out why people put out trail cams. Trail cams are low quality video, if they're video. Most of the time that they're just images, pictures. And they're done with infrared light. If you had a picture from a trail cam of a Sasquatch, unless it was standing perfectly still at just the right distance away from it, that trail cam's not going to have much on it. During the day, yeah. During the day, you might get something that's decent. I've seen some pretty good pictures of like deer and cougars and that kind of stuff come off of trail cams. But at night, when is probably you're most likely to get a picture of a Sasquatch, if you do, it's not going to be that good of a quality. So I don't really understand why they're doing that. Instead of setting up some kind of a trap system that triggers an actual high def, DSLR or something to take high def video, trigger a DSLR, trigger some lighting, it goes off, catches the Sasquatch in the middle of an opening with just the right focus, and that to me is about the only thing that's really worth doing as far as that. And when I go out there with my expedition vehicle, that's what I intend to do. I intend to capture. The only way you could dismiss is if you just absolutely swear it's got to be, movie quality animation or something. That's the only way you could dismiss it. That's the kind of video I want to capture of a Sasquatch. And I have some ideas on how to do that. Actually, I might just throw some of those out there right now. I'm going to go ahead and try to call a guest again. And while it's doing that, we'll see. One of the ideas that I had as far as capturing a Bigfoot capturing a still image, a photo of a Bigfoot, is the researchers say that they can tell that these trail cams are there, and that they avoid them. Well, if I understand it correctly, that's because they're
9078.
They're using infrared video or infrared light as the way of sensing movement. Years ago, cameras used you could use sound to sense movement, and that would trigger stuff, or use it for a motion sensor, that kind of thing. So I was a little surprised that that's not what trail cams are doing. But I guess they're using infrared light of some kind that's always on, and that they're saying that the Bigfoot can see that. I think what they need to do is get a high quality camera, build yourself a box. I'm just as off the cuff. If you want to improve upon this design, have at it. But build yourself a box that you can put a camera inside of, and put I don't know, is it called one-way glass or one-way mirror or whatever, where you can see through it, like they use in police investigations. Put a camera inside that so that what's on the outside is mirrored. And hang that from a tree, or attach it to a tree or whatever, and put a light on the top of it, so that when that thing gets triggered, it actually sends light out, lights up the area, and turns the camera on. I'm reading a comment, folks. Hold on a second. Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that you're in the hospital there, Robert. But I'm glad to hear that you like the show. So they trigger, once that's triggered, the light goes off and the camera behind the mirror, Bigfoot can't see it. It's not using infrared, it uses motion, actual like a vibration sensor that sets this off. Lights up the Bigfoot, starts taking the video or the still images or whatever through the, was it two-way mirror, I think is what it is. So that the Bigfoot can't see the camera, and I'm betting that the Bigfoot will go up to the mirror and wonder what the heck it's looking at. Just like anytime, I mean, you have a puppy or a cat or whatever, when you have like a mirrored wall, they're always going up to the mirror and they think there's another animal there, and that. Be interesting to see if the Bigfoot think the same thing and they walk up and start looking in at the mirror. Hopefully they won't just punch it and destroy the camera, but look up out of curiosity and stand there long enough for the camera to be triggered and take a photo of it. I think that would be the best way, given the circumstances that have been put out there about how these trail cams are working. That to me would be the best way to trap a Bigfoot and get a photo of it or video. Oh, Robert, if you want to call in and share your encounters, that's perfectly fine with me. Go ahead and call in. That's why the number's up there. Anyone who wants to call in and share your encounters, go for it. I only have one line. There is no call waiting. There is no, multiple, like a switchboard situation. So you'll have to wait until the line's open before you can call. But yeah, Robert, go ahead. There's nobody on the line. You can go ahead and call, and I'll take your call right now if you want to. Well, so you don't want to, hold on. So you don't want to talk about your encounter. You just want to email me your encounter. Is that what you're saying, or are you going to give me a phone number I can call you at? There's a 30-second delay, folks, between the time I say something and the time that you actually see it on the video. So you'll have to give it a few seconds. Well, thank you. I don't know how to say that username. The KV, I guess. So I'm waiting for Robert to answer me. If you want to, you can email me your phone number and how to get a hold of you, and I can call your room, and if you're allowed to do that, and that way I'll call in instead of you calling out. It's up to you. No? All right, anyway, folks, what was I talking about? Robert, you have my email address, so just email me, and we'll go from there, I guess. Now, folks, the number down, where is it? Here, right there. Yeah, if you have an encounter with Sasquatch you want to talk about, or anything like that, go ahead and call the number. We'll talk about it. The show's kind of the guest I had on for tonight isn't answering his phone. I don't know what's going on with him. It's actually Ryan from the last time, and he's a trucker, so he might have got snagged, in the middle of doing a run or whatever. I don't know what the situation is, but he's not answering his phone, so we're going to have to wing it because he hasn't texted me or anything. So if you have something, an encounter to discuss, go ahead and give me a call. We'll have you on the air right now. Anyway, I have a pet peeve as far as these researchers. I mean, if you're going to go out, I find it Field research, I mean, yeah, there's some use to it, but I find it's very limited because we've already kind of gotten everything that you can get from field research. All right, folks, I'm going to call Robert and we'll get his encounters in Virginia, I guess. Give me just a second.
Hello?
Hello, is this Robert?
Yeah. How are you doing?
All right, how you doing, man?
Yeah, I'm actually watching you live. I hope I'm actually live with you now if I'm not watching behind you.
Well, there's about a 30-second delay.
I got you. First off, man, I love your show. I watch a lot of different ones of these, you know.
Well,
when
I
you're
appreciate
younger
that.
and you've never seen anything like that, you kind of laugh at people when they tell those stories.
Yeah.
And now at my age, having actually seen and dealt with a few things, I don't laugh at all. I find these stories to be absurdly interesting. But if you like, I'll start out with the first thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, go ahead, tell it. First of all, prior to anything happening to you, what was your knowledge and experience of Bigfoot? Was it a non-existent thing? Or
like
what?
I said, I'm from deep in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm from the Appalachian Plateau. It's like the southwestern side of Virginia, west of Virginia Tech.
Oh.
So we have very high mountains.
Is that anywhere near Lee County, Pennington Gap?
Yeah, it's not far from Lee.
Yeah, I'm actually, my father's family, the hillbillies I talk about, are in Lee County over in Stickleyville.
So you'll know what I talk about when I say I'm from a holler.
Yeah, that's where I saw my Bigfoot, was back in the holler up in the mountains. Yeah. Right.
You know, there's valleys. There's big valleys in between the mountains.
Right.
And then there's little hollers in between.
Right.
And my family had always owned a holler. You know, it had always been in the family property all my life.
Right.
And I'd always heard stories from my grandma that, you know, if you ever heard noises at night, that you were to ignore them. And that if you ever heard your mama or your daddy screaming or hollering from the woods, never go in the woods looking for your parents.
And wait a minute, how long ago was that?
Well, I guess the stories from my grandma was probably when I was 10. I'm 33 now.
So what year were they telling you if you hear us hollering for you from the woods?
Probably 94, around the early 90s.
Well, that's interesting. That long ago,
because my
people
grandma
knew.
died in 95.
So people knew about the mimicking even way back then, right? That's interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, my grandma had my mom when she was 47.
Wow,
as odd as that is. So
yeah,
my
then,
grandma was in her
unusual.
80s. My grandma was in her 80s when I was a kid.
Yeah,
and,
okay.
Yeah, they used to call it Mr. Bailey.
Mr. Bailey.
Old Mr. Bailey. That was we'd had nothing but women in the family for many years. So the family name had changed several times. And they'd always called it Old Mr. Bailey. My first experience that it's only looking back that I realize they might have been experiences. Because I never saw a Sasquatch just stand up in front of me and show himself. It wasn't like that. It's not like I just had some giant monster stand up in front of me. We had a 3-part home. Our home, the first part of our home was built in 1820, and it had its own chimney. And then the second part of our home was built in, I want to say the early 1900s, And then the third part of our home was built in 1921 or 22. And each side had its own chimney. And it had an upstairs and a second addition. And it only had one bathroom. And when I was a kid, I used to go sleep with my grandma. Well, see, we didn't use the first chimney in the first edition of the house anymore. It'd been a long time since that chimney had been used, and the whole chimney had gotten to where it was full of honey. It was the whole chimney was a beehive. I mean, from top to bottom. It was just a big old beehive. Excuse me, I'm spitting out my dip so I can speak to you a little bit better. But
I'm putting one in so I can listen to you a little better.
During the summer, what would happen is when it would get hot, honey would drip down the chimney. And sometimes we'd collect the honey, sometimes we wouldn't. It just kind of depended. But the home was built on oak trees from the property. So all the lumber was true cut oak from the land that we lived on. So, you know, our rafters, our beams, our trusses, everything on that house was built true cut from real oak. So the house was solid. And me and my brother used to climb out the top window and jump around and play and jump on the roof. And you could never hear nothing. I mean, you could never hear us playing on the roof. And a couple summer nights, I could hear something on the roof walking around. And I woke up Grandma and I asked her to listen to it, and she listened to it. And it sounded like footsteps on the roof. And she told me it was Mr. Bailey, because she always described Mr. Bailey as red-eyed, and he hid in the woods. Now, that was just a description she gave me. I guess it was really the only one she had at the time, you know. She had to make up something that would scare the kids enough to keep them out of the woods in the evenings, because when I was 5 years old, my dad gave me my first gun. So it's not like we wasn't out in the woods all the time, but in early spring, now, where I'm from, spring don't come till May. You know, I'm down here, I live in Florida now, and it's springtime all the time. But back in the woods, springtime don't come till early, late May. And our parents didn't really think about it, but Grandma always kept us out of the woods in the early springtime. And I never thought much about it, but thinking back on it now, it was Mr. Bailey was the reason. And the night, or the nights plural, that we could hear something on the roof. And like I said, this is a sturdy roof, so to hear something up there, it's got to be something serious. But the nights that we could hear something on the roof, we'd wake up in the morning, and there would be comb and honey and bees and all kinds of stuff that had been falling down the chimney. Now, I thought that odd as a kid, you know, being young, but I never thought much about it. And, you know, that I think, looking back on it, might have been my first experiences with something happening, because the bees collect clover honey where I'm from, and they start collecting and building honey in like late May, early June. Well, anyway, the second experience that I had was a little more, well, I guess you'll hear in just a second. It was a little more clear. I used to tell it as a ghost story, because that's what me and my brother thought it was when we was a kid. But there was a house up the road. So like I said, this was all family land. It was a hollow that was about 170, 250. It's hard to gauge that kind of area when it's on a mountainside. You know, it's got flat land at the bottom that we grew crops in, and then, you know, big tall sides that goes up each direction. And there was a house, and this house had been abandoned many years ago, so many years ago that it had trees growing kind of up and in it. But it had no floor. It had 2 rooms. It had a door on one side of the house and a door on the other side of the house. And it had 1 window. And the walls, I remember the walls because it was the strangest thing when I was a kid. Now, I was about 10 years old, 12 years old when this happened. But the walls, me and my brother was inspecting them because the wallpaper was made of old newspaper. And while we was inspecting the walls and looking at them and reading all the old articles, all of a sudden, on the upper side, a big shadow came across the front door. And the shadow didn't cover the whole front door. It's not like something stepped in front of the front door. It's like something leaned over in front of the front door and blocked the shadow. And my brother saw it first and grabbed me, and I turned around and looked at it, and we run off. We run all the way back home. Now that was the second thing that happened to me, and I like I say, I only recently do I look at it like it might have been a Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, but I don't believe in ghosts. And like I say, looking back on it, that's kind of how it seems. The third experience I had was a little bit different. We had always grown up hearing that if you heard a woman screaming in the woods, now this has come from my mama and my daddy, my grandma, my grandpa, they all said the same thing. If you hear a woman screaming in the woods, be careful and don't go outside because it's panthers. Because we got a big cougar and panther population up there. And so I'd always been taught that the sound of a woman screaming was cougars. Now, looking back on it now and listening to screams and stuff I've heard on the internet and on the BFRO websites, that ain't what you hear up there no more. A cat has a secondary vocal cord that you hear. That's a wow. That it's a very different thing. Anyway, when I was about 17 or 18, that'd be around the year 2000. My mom owns a property that's about 10 acres. It's 4 or 5 acres, a beautiful yard with an orchard in it. And then it's another 5 or 10 acres up the mountainside. Now, where we live, you can look at it on the maps. You can get on like Google Maps and look at it. And it's a place called Cascade Drive. It's just south of the only natural lake in Virginia called Mountain Lake. And anyway, on I guess the south side, one day, me and my buddy John, we climbed up to the top of the hill. Now the funny thing around here is that we got these rock formations that run. They call them fences. They say they're old fences, but there ain't no way they're old fences because a man wouldn't build a fence this way. But they're 10 or 12 foot high rock formations, just piled rock that runs straight up and down the mountains. And me and my buddy John got up and followed one to the top of the mountain one day. And you get up to the top of the mountain, and well, what's the way to describe it? It ain't got no trees. It's old pasture land. I'm on the phone, ma'am. Thank you for my popsicles. I'll take my medication later. Sorry, I'm in the hospital for a blood bacteria. Anyway, so on the top of the mountain, there ain't no trees. There's just high grass. And can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can
Hello?
hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, I just want to make sure she came in, and I kind of lost my place.
Yeah, I just usually mute my mic and
Anyway,
let you tell your story.
what we have running near the house is a native trout streams. And native trout streams have real specific requirements because they have to be beautiful, they have to be pristine waters, like waters that you can drink out of with your hands. And they're all spring-fed. And anyway, there ain't many places in America still that have native trout, but at the top of this mountain, like I said, and I believe it's on the south side, there is a spring that is just a little pond, and it's the oddest thing I'd ever seen in my life. I took my wife up there a couple years later, and it's still the same. But so up here on the top of this mountain where there ain't no trees, and it's probably a 30-acre spread. It's a beautiful place. Like you go camping there and be able to see all the stars. It's just one of them spots. But I don't know, maybe 50 yards back from the deer trail that we'd followed to get up there, there was a really odd spot, and it was where the water had come up and it made a little pond. And the pond wasn't but maybe a quarter-acre pond, but it didn't have outflow to it, so it's not like it was a stream pond. Whatever it is was fed so slow that it was just enough to keep water in it. But what was so odd about it was that all around the left side of the pond was all these carcasses. Turkey carcasses, stuff I couldn't even recognize. Probably coyote carcasses, stuff that looked like predator carcasses, looked like might have been a cougar skull there. And to my understanding, it's still there because a couple years later, like I said, I took my wife up there and it was still like that. But something, and now you got to remember, a cougar don't hunt this way. A cougar does not hunt and bring all its prey back to the same place and eat it. That's not how it does, because the smell of the dead might attract a bear. And we got a lot of bear up there. We have a lot of black bear. Anyway, we found it very odd. Like I said, it was medium game. It was deer. It was turkey. It even looked like there was some predator animals that had been caught up and was part of this bone pile. So whatever it was, used to sit down beside this little pond, and the water, like I said, the water's so clear you can see straight to the bottom. You can see the leaves in the bottom of the pond.
Well, it sounds like a nice place for.
It's almost just
It sounded like
it's a gorgeous place.
It sounds like a nice place for a picnic.
It actually is. Yeah. Some folks from Ohio came down and bought like 5,000 acres on this side of the mountain, and actually was going to turn it into a retreat. And they just they couldn't get the people to come in because it's a rural area. It's next to a place called the Cascades, and they figured this natural waterfall would draw in the people, and they'd come in and see it. And there's no economy there. That's why I live here in Florida, is because there's no economy back at home.
Well, evidently the Bigfoot thinks it's a nice place for a picnic too, so that's why.
Yeah, I mean, it's a gorgeous place. It's a place you would go and camp. I mean, we always want to go up there and go camping.
And it's very unusual.
Now, nothing happened while.
It's very unusual to find a panther skull, because, as I understand it, panthers, like I guess all predators, when they're going to die, they go off and hide, basically.
Well, and especially being a pile.
Right.
Now, this wasn't just like I said, one or two carcasses together. This is a pile of carcasses. This is where something consistently eats.
The only way
but it don't eat there all the time. Whatever it was, eat there a couple times a year, and then moved on, because there wasn't any fresh kill there. The turkey wings didn't have any feathers on them. There wasn't no cartilage on the bone. I mean, we looked at it real good. It was a very odd thing. You know, I'm a man of the mountains. We get out there and hunt and fish, and we do our thing. I mean, you know what you're looking at most of the time. And this was something we didn't quite understand. So that same night, me and John, we decided we was going to go camping. Now, like I said, if you look up our property, it's, like I said, Cascade Drive in Giles County, Virginia, or you could look up on Google Maps the Cascade Falls. You'll see that it butts up against Jefferson National Forest. Now, Jefferson National Forest is thousands and thousands and thousands of acres and about 3 or 4 valleys all the way into West Virginia of untouched land. I mean, there's nothing there. There's nothing but some trails there, honestly, for, you know, trucks to go mudding. That's it. And anyway, so, like, if you go across the road from Mom's house, so we was on one side of Mom's house up the hill. Mom lived at the base of the hill next to the creek. And, I mean, 50 yards one direction, you had to go up the mountain, and 50 yards the other direction, you had to go up the mountain. And in the other 2 directions, there's a road that, you know, followed the creek up and down. But, the pond is not on the Jefferson National Forest side, it's on the other side. But if you go up the other direction, there's 3 or 4 hunting cabins before you get to that Jefferson National Forest. So there's maybe, as the crow flies, there's maybe a half mile of land, of ownable land up the mountain. I believe the mountain's actually called Butt Mountain, like B-U-T-T Mountain. But me and John, we decided just kind of on a whim that we was going to go camping, and it was, I'd just gotten out of high school, so it couldn't, we get out of school around the first week of June, so it was probably the middle of June, you know. And we went to a place that I knew, which was, now, these mountainsides, when I talk about going up the mountain, I'm not talking about walking up a hill like you do other places in America. You know, I've been around a little bit the East Coast. These mountainsides are 45-degree angles straight up. So what you do is there's all these switchback roads that you use to get to where you go. You don't travel straight up and down anywhere. Hell, I don't even believe a car would do it, or a truck. But anyway, so we went up to this place, and it's an old field next to a hunting cabin. And during the spring, all the hunting cabins are abandoned unless somebody's doing spring turkey hunting. And most people don't bother with that. You know, that's just that's a young man's pursuit. And most of these cabins were they were older guys that owned them. Anyway, so me and John, we weren't super prepared for the night. We just kind of brought some pot to smoke, some cigarettes, and a couple beers, and just kind of set up and started just a little fire, and planned on it that about every hour or two we would go out and get some firewood and, you know, stoke a fire up. So we got us a big old log, set up a little teepee of sticks and started a fire, and used the big log to keep an ash going so that we could just go get wood and throw on it. Well, come about 12 o'clock maybe, about the time you start, you know, when you're a kid and you're out that late at night doing something with your buddies, midnight ain't the kind of time you're getting tired. So, you know, we weren't tired. We were still wound up. We were having a good time. And we heard I want to think of the right word. I don't want to used the wrong verbiage to describe it because it was not a mountain lion. We heard a scream. We heard it wasn't a woman's scream. I hear a lot of these descriptives on, like the Sasquatch Chronicles. They describe a woman's scream. This wasn't a woman's scream. This was an animal scream. And it was loud. It wasn't this shake your belly kind of loud that I hear them talking about, but it was loud. And maybe 10 minutes later, we start hearing something walking around on the top side. Now, if I didn't properly describe it, we're in the middle of a field, and it's June, so the grass is 36, 40 inches high all around us. And about 15, 20 yards each direction, you get into the woods. And these locust woods, they're pretty thick wood, but during the daytime or with a flashlight, you could see through them. You know, it's not like I hear other people describe the woods in other places. The woods are thick, but you can see through them. There's not much underbrush. The canopies are real thick, so the only thing really on the ground is dead foliage and leaves, you know. So, anyway, now this is on the upper side of us, not on the lower side. We start hearing this, I guess, walking, noise making. Walking is a hard descriptive to put to it, because when it happened, we told ourselves that it was a panther or a mountain lion. And all I know today, and what I've learned to mountain lions, there's no way that it was a mountain lion. Because a mountain lion ain't there to let you know she's there. You know what I mean? That's not their purpose or intent.
Did it sound like it was bipedal, or?
Yeah. Well, it's, as a kid, you know, as an 18-year-old kid, you don't really think about whether it's bipedal or not. You don't think about the sound that it's making. You only think that, you know, hey, a squirrel can sound this loud at night. So if this thing sounds this loud, it must be a right good size. And for about 20 minutes or so, it whatever it was, shifted around up there in the woods and made noise. It made itself known to us, is what it done. It, like I said, I wish I could say, looking back, that it was bipedal, but, you know, that wasn't the mindset we had. The mindset we had was, holy shit, there's a cougar up there stalking us. We need to pay attention. And I always carry a little Squirrel 22 with me, so I kept it loaded, you know, just in case.
Right.
You know, just a little short, hell, maybe 30 inches long gun that, you know, it's really just more of a varmint gun.
Right.
And, you know, I kept it close by, but me and John sit there and listen to it, and the first time we heard it, it didn't really bother us. You know, we listened to it for, like I said, 10, 15, 20 minutes, it up there making noise. It screamed once or twice, and then it kind of stopped.
What did the scream sound like? The woman?
Like I said, it was not a high-pitched scream like a woman, and it was damn sure not the row of a cougar. You know, I tell you that I know that for certain, that it was not a cougar. Obviously, you've heard by my words that where we're from, we call them cougars and panthers and mountain lions. They're all kind of the same thing to us.
Right.
But that's not what it was. You know, we'd always been told, like I said, a cougar will sound like a woman screaming or a baby crying. And it wasn't either one of them. It was deeper.
Yeah, but there's an odd sound to a cougar. I think you kind of mentioned it. You said something about a secondary vocal cord or something. That they
Yeah.
it's almost like a resonating sound
Yeah, I
quality
mean,
to their voice.
it's got its own cat sound to it. You
Right.
know a cougar when you hear it.
Right.
And later on in life, I'd actually run across a couple bobcats and some cougars out hunting. So, I mean, I've heard them make noises.
Right.
But at this time in my life, I hadn't. So, like I said, my mindset said that this was a cougar. But like I said, looking back on it, that's not what it was. That's absolutely 100% absolutely in my gut. That's not what it was. So anyway, like I said, we had this fire set to where we was going to have to tend it. So because whatever it was stomping around up there on the upper side of us, me and John went down to the lower side and started gathering some sticks and some wood. And we went back to the fire and sat down. And I'm talking not 5 minutes. Absolutely not 5 minutes after we walked down to the lower side of where we were, this thing started making the noise again, only this time, instead of being on the upper side of us, it was on the lower side where we just were. And it didn't make no sound going around the corners. We never heard it go around us and down, and, as much noise as this thing was making, you would figure you would hear it go from above us to below us, but you did not. And when it got below us, it started screaming a whole lot more. And like I said, screaming is a weird word for it because a scream is a loud, as hard as you can kind of noise. You know what I mean? That's not what this was. Whatever noise this was wasn't an animal making as much scream. It wasn't something doing it as hard as it could. You know what I mean? It was something that was making a noise for you to be aware of. And this time it's stomping around and it's kind of breaking branches and shit. But we've got branches everywhere. I mean, the ground's full of dead foliage and branches and, small wood. And it certainly was breaking it this time. Now, the first time, I don't recall it being above us. I don't recall it breaking sticks and stuff.
So you mean that it changed from, say, stepping on sticks to where you would actually could envision it was actually snapping them off the trees?
Well, the kind of sticks that are on the ground are no bigger than your thumb, really.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
In that kind of a boreal forest, it's the sticks just aren't that big. These sticks were sizable. Whatever was stepping on these sticks the second time, or breaking them, or snapping them, or whatever it was doing it a lot more forcefully and determinably than it was when it was above us.
So they went from little sticks to basically branches that were being broken.
Well, that would be the assumption. But now, that was all that could be. That's all I could do is suppose that's what it was.
Right.
Because we had flashlights, but, like I said, we weren't real prepared. We just went up on the woods to go, spend a night away from the parents and, kind of hang out. We weren't thinking much about having to deal with no animals or nothing like that. And so, like I said, the second time it made a lot more noise. And it made the noise for a lot longer. The first time it might have made noise for 10, 15 minutes. This time it stomped around down there I use the word stomp around because you don't make noises in the leaves like that without stomping around. That's not... A cat's paw, lays down such a soft noise that you couldn't hear it if you weren't 20 feet from him, you know?
Right.
A cat's paw's quiet. And this thing wasn't quiet. This thing wasn't trying to be quiet. Whatever it was for certain making sure we knew it was there.
What I find interesting
and
is
looking
that
back on it,
it was
I'm
making
sorry?
it. What I find interesting is that it was making its presence known, except when it was relocating.
Well, here's the thing. Did it relocate?
Oh, you think there might have been more than one?
Well, I mean, when me and John talked about it later, we considered that the second one sounded heavier.
So do you think...
You know, whatever it was making a noise the second time was louder, more distinct, closer to the tree line, and, like I said, breaking branches or sticks that were sizable enough to be distinct.
Well, do you remember
whatever was
hearing
above
anything from both sides at the same time, or did it stopped there and it started over here?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you very well.
I said, do you remember hearing the noises coming from both places simultaneously, or did it stop where it was and start somewhere else?
No, they never came from the same place simultaneously. That never happened. Because after the first, so it started on the top side, and then me and John went and got some wood, and then whatever it was moved down below us to the lower end of us, to the bottom side of the mountain, and started making all that noise. And like I said, it made it for a longer time, and then it got quiet, and then the noise started up above us again. But when the noise started up above us the second time, instead of being up in the woods, this was on the tree line. You know, whatever it was the second time up above us, which would have been the third time we'd heard it, this was right on the edge of the woods. This was something that was stomping through the blackberries, and, you know, because on the edge of the woods, you know, you get the grasses growing, but right there at the edges of the woods, you get all these briar patches, which are always blackberries. And whatever it was close. I mean, it then went from 20 yards up, and, you know, 20 yards is not far, but it's far enough for an animal for you to get an eye on it if it to come into light. Now, the second time around, like I said, when it was above us on the upper side of the hill, it was close. It was scary close. It was close enough for two young boys filled with testosterone to start getting nervous. Well, our fire, like I said, because we weren't well prepared, our fire had done started dying, and we had both gotten uncomfortable about going down in the woods and getting firewood. And by now, it was probably 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You know, time had passed. This had been going on for a while now. You know, this has done been 10 to 15 minutes with us, of it screwing with us up above us. Then, you know, a 20, 30 minutes period of us going and getting some wood. Then a 30 or 40 minute period of it making noise down below us. Then another pause, and then all of a sudden it's up above us again. Well, about that time, me and John started getting nervous. You know, we started thinking, well, it's time to get on out of here. And like I said, the roads back are switchbacks. So you go, you know, a quarter mile one way and then cut back the other, and then cut back the other, and then cut back the other. But that whole hill up there where we were staying was my mom's property. So I go up there and cut firewood all year long, because the locust trees will die over and they'll fall halfway down, and you can go put a couple cuts on them and then roll them down the mountain and finish cutting them and bust them up right there. So, I mean, I knew the property as well as the back of my hand. But now we started thinking about getting home. So because we'd been out playing and, kind of looking for wood and screwing around, our flashlights were dim as dim gets. Our flashlights were so dim that when you turned them on, you couldn't see 5 feet from you. You could only barely see right there at your feet.
Yeah,
well,
not
luckily, I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, I just said that's not good.
Yeah, no, and that's enough to really start building a bit of fear in you, too. You've already been hearing this noise all night. You think there's a cougar in the woods. Earlier in the day, you done saw a pile where something has been eating on animals, and not just small prey animals, but predatory animals. And now you got yourself to a point where you're in the woods with very little light and very little fire. Well, one of the things that I had brought with me were roadside flares, because we had planned on lighting off these roadside flares and playing with them and screwing with them and throwing them at each other, and, the kind of dumb stuff young boys do. And so we made the decision right there that we was going to light those road flares and book it to the house, and that's what we did. It had stopped making noise up above us for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, long enough for us to get our thoughts together. And we both took a road flare and lit it, and I'd never had one lit before, so I didn't really know how it worked. But when you light a road flare, it drips a lava off of it. You got to hold it out from your body. But me and John both, we left our tents. I took my 22 and a couple beers and put them in our pockets, and we both lit a road flare and ran straight down the mountain back to the house. Now, I had told that story several times, to my close friends and everything, but it wasn't until I started really learning about Sasquatch and learning about Bigfoot and the areas it was in and the hunting patterns it had and the way it done things, that I had really thought that, maybe that night was not a cougar, that the behavior that it exhibited was not that of a cougar. If a cougar was, first off, a cougar's territory is so wide that a cougar's territory would have been that entire mountain. It wouldn't have just been a couple 100 yards that we were playing on or screwing around in to where it would want to run us off. If a cougar had been interested in us, it would have been sitting there quietly on the edge of the woods hunting us. Whatever this was not doing such. Whatever this was making noise and letting us know that it was there. Which, in all my life, I've never had an animal that wanted you to know it was there.
No, it doesn't sound
I've walked
like
out
anything.
on my porch and seen a 400 or 500 pound black bear eating in my trash can, but he never once wanted me to know he was there.
And then the bear run off when
But
you
anyway,
found it?
it's not as interesting as a lot of these stories I hear on Sasquatch Chronicles and all that stuff, but looking back on it, those are the things that had happened to me back in Virginia when I was a kid.
Well, that last thing with was there, what, describe to me again what exactly was around in that field? It was just a little pond?
I'm sorry?
So describe for me
What exactly is
was in that field that y'all were camping in?
Are you talking about the field on the hill or the field we were sleeping in?
Where you had your tents and they were making noise above and below you?
That was it's on the north side of the mountain on a place called Butt Mountain, and it's just a 100 by 100 maybe field, just a grass field that the hunters keep cut down with a brush hog. That they go up there and brush hog once or twice a year, so they can use it as a place to sight in their muzzle loaders. It was just a field.
So there
As
was
the crow flies, maybe not a quarter mile from Mom's house, but by the road, a couple miles walk.
so there's no water source, nothing that would actually interest. the
No.
Sasquatch.
There's water sources everywhere.
I mean, right in the field where
That's
you
why
were.
That's why I was describing the springs that we have. We have these natural springs. We call them wet water springs. But it's all limestone caves where we live. There's caves everywhere. We go cave diving and play around in caves. We've done it all our whole lives.
But as
you
far
could
as
go
where you
anywhere,
were, as far as where you
as
were,
where I was, maybe 70, 80 yards down the road, there was a wet water spring you could drink from.
but there was nothing. There was no way. It sounds to me that Sasquatch either it was trying to make you leave for some reason. Like you were blocking it from getting to something, or it was afraid of carrying on with its normal activities. Like if you were right there on the side of that pond you described earlier, I could see it's mad because that's where it wanted to get a drink of water kind of thing. But it doesn't sound like there was anything there.
Yeah, no, we weren't in a place where we were stopping it from getting water. And honestly, to be trying to run us off from that place seems strange to me because we weren't 500 yards from a hunting cabin. Like I said, this is a field where people sight their muzzleloaders during muzzleloading season. People are here during the fall all year long hunting. But yet again, this was late spring, and I've done come to the theory that they moved through our area during the springtime.
How
They
tall?
moved south to north.
How tall was the grass where you were?
Probably 30, 40 inches. It was tall enough to be seeding.
So is it feasible, just throwing something out there, is it feasible that this Sasquatch was a female that had at least one young that was hiding in the grass where you were?
Oh, God, yeah.
And
you could have hid in the grass.
So she might have been nervous because...
You could have got down on your belly. You wouldn't even have to get on your belly. You could have got on your hands and knees and hid in the grass.
So it's possible.
Yeah. Oh, it's certainly possible.
Because that's...
Now, the way we figured it wasn't... We weren't, in all our thinking and talking about it, we didn't have it figured that we were stopping it from doing something. We had it figured that this thing had seen us up there at its dinner table earlier that day. That's what we had figured. We had figured whatever this was had seen us up there on the other side of the mountain. Well, like I said, where that pond is, where all those dead animals were, and had seen us up there, and then now we're on the other side of the mountain, and it didn't want us anywhere around. That's how we had it figured.
I suppose that could be. But I think it was just a little bit too determined. When y'all didn't leave right away, I would think it would have made some noise, let you know it was around there, gave its little protest and then left. But it didn't. It stayed around.
And there wasn't none of the rock throwing that you hear about either. And there wasn't nothing like that.
Yeah, it almost sounded to me like it was trying to get you to either leave or go towards it. Move from where you were. You know what I'm saying? Which to me means maybe that you all happened to go in there and you trapped one of its young that was hiding in the grass. And she was nervous and trying to, by moving from one side to the other, trying to get y'all to either go towards her or to leave or something like that, so that the little one could get out of there. That's kind of what it sounds like to me.
It's entirely possible. There's plenty enough area there, and there's plenty of high enough grass, and it's a comfortable enough spot to bed down in. And we got up there late. It's not like we walked up there and, set up our camp at 5 o'clock in the day. We probably didn't get up there until 9 o'clock at night. Late enough to where there was just enough light in the sky for us to grab some logs and start a fire.
Well, either way, there to me it sounds like absolutely it was a Sasquatch. I mean, I just can't imagine what else it could have been. There's
Well, like I
nothing.
said, that's how we figure it now too. Is that's the only thing that would have done what it done. I
And
mean, I honestly, I find it more frightening thinking back about when I was 7 or 8 years old. You know, I'd made a comment on your website about how I thought that might be the most interesting niche, is about Sasquatches with children.
Oh, was
Because
that you?
looking back on it, the Sasquatch that kind of had us boxed in that house when I was a kid, that is scarier to me now than us up on that mountain ever was.
Yeah, the one of the things that makes me think that it was probably trying to get you to move for the young is the fact that it wasn't doing that loud, vicious, whatever scream. You know, it was almost like when a mother's worried for her child and she's yelling for it, kind of thing. You know, rather than
Well, now,
being angry and saying, "Hey, get the hell out of here," kind of thing.
there's a powerful logic to that.
All right.
Because had it been the kind of screams I've heard on some of these websites, you would have heard it across the whole holler. It would have reverberated for miles around.
Right.
But the noises it was making that night, you could only hear really where we were, you know?
Yeah, and usually they're, you know, when they're trying to scare people off, they're just screaming at the top of their lungs, and you know, it's all part
now
of
we're
the
also
display.
talking about a place where a lot of people go missing.
Oh, actually, one of the commenters asked about that. If you knew of any stories of people going missing.
You know, when I talked to David Politis about it, because I spoke to him about whether he'd done any research in the area I'm from, he dismissed it because we'd had several serial killers in our area, like a man named Randall Smith that had been called the Killer on the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
He had murdered several people, got out of jail on bond, and then murdered several more. So there's been several serial killers in that area. But there's also been a lot of missing people, and not just kids. I mean, there's been a lot of missing kids, but I mean, there's been missing older people. You know, there's a generation there. You know, the generation that's my age has started to leave because there's no work. You know, Obama shut down the coal mines, and that put 40,000 technical workers out of jobs. So now all of a sudden, in a place that where the minimum wage is $7.25, and all the factories left in the 90s because of NAFTA, now all of a sudden there's 100 people that put in an application for a job at the grocery store.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I said, most of the young men have got up and left. And it's a lot of older people and younger people that live there. Because you know, a lot of the younger people can't afford to raise their own kids, and their kids live with their grandparents. That's a real typical story where I'm from. And then the grandparents live there because they lived there during the boom time and could afford to buy homes and buy land,
right,
and own farms. And yeah, no, there's people that come up missing there quite often. And I've read some BFRO reports of that area too. I read one specifically about a place called Dismal Falls. But yeah, it's, you know, I've had friends tell me stories of them seeing black bears that were 1,000 pounds. Now, to a man that don't know nothing about it, they'd say, "Oh, well, that's a big old bear." But to a man who's seen a big bear, a big black bear is 350 pounds.
Yeah.
1,000, coming from a man who hunts every year, who owns cattle, if he says he saw 1,000-pound black bear, then it's kind of a it's kind of a question of what that man really saw and what he was really saying.
Oh, okay. So you're not saying it really was a black bear. You're saying that you think it was misidentified, that the guy assumed.
Well, I'm
it was
telling
a
you, the
black bear.
man would have never told you that it was a Sasquatch. He would have never said, not for his life would he have had you laugh in his face. And, you tell him it's bullshit. There ain't nothing like that out in the woods. But he would tell you, I have seen a 1,000-pound black bear.
Yeah, I got you. Well,
But
Robert,
then again, I got a lot of friends that hunt, and they don't all tell me those kind of stories either.
Well, Robert, we're running over in time. I appreciate you calling in.
Well, sir, I appreciate you having me on your show, and I hope you keep on doing more of them. I'm glad you do it on Sunday so I don't miss my Saturday football.
Were you the one who commented on me doing more about the Sasquatch and the young girls at the window and that kind of thing?
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah, that
okay.
was me.
Yeah, I thought that was what you were saying a little bit ago.
That was me.
Yeah, I'm trying to find those stories, like the especially the one where the Sasquatch tried to grab the little girl out of the car. That one specifically,
well, I tell you,
somebody
the
asked
story,
me about.
The story of the Sasquatch chasing that car and sticking his hand in there and trying to grab her. That story stuck out to me like some of the ghost stories we used to hear as kids.
The one where they thought somebody was in trouble and they slowed down and they ran up and tried to grab his girlfriend. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds like the kind of stories we grew. Now, you got to remember, we didn't grow up hearing stories of there being Bigfoots everywhere. We grew up hearing stories about monsters in the woods and how you don't go in the woods at night, or how you don't go here, or how you don't go there. And, that's the kind of stuff they told us as kids. And, I'm not some old man. I'm 33 years old. We're not talking about back in the 50s they was telling us these stories. This back in the 80s and 90s they were telling us these things.
Right.
But anyway, I'm going to let you go. I appreciate talking to you, sir, and you have a good evening.
All right. Thanks for calling in, Robert. Fascinating. Thanks for telling your stories.
All right. Bye.
Bye. All right, folks. Well, that's pretty much it for this week's show. I'm going to see if I can get a hold of Ryan and have him come back next week, because Ryan actually did some logging, and he's from a couple of generations of loggers, and he had talked to me offline about the whole situation with, if Sasquatch was officially recognized, how it would affect them, and I thought it would be interesting to actually do that on a show. So I'm going to try and get him back for next week to do that. So let's see, where's my So if you want to try and get a hold of me, well, actually there's a phone number. You can call and leave right there. You can call and leave a voicemail if I don't answer, or you can email me at sasquatchhypotheses@gmail.com. And until next time, y'all take it easy.